They've reviewed million-dollar supercars and thrashed hypercars around racetracks, but some of the most unexpected rides owned by the Top Gear trio are dirt cheap. We're talking cars you could find on Facebook Marketplace if you looked hard enough. So today, we're flipping the spotlight. From Bugattis and Ferraris to battered old hatchbacks, classic rust buckets, and bargain buys, you're about to find out which cheap cars the kings of motoring TV actually chose to own. Let's start with Captain Slow. Despite his polished on-screen image and love for complicated Italian sports cars, James May has always had a strange admiration for the simple stuff. And nothing sums that up better than his long-lasting affection for the Fiat Panda, specifically a 2005 Panda 1.2 Dynamic in faded metallic gray. He bought it brand new that year for around £4,000, not for show, not for fun, because he genuinely liked it. While other car show hosts might roll up in something flashy, May opted for the kind of car you'd find parked outside a corner shop. What drew him to it? Simplicity. The Panda had manual everything: windows, steering, gearbox, and it was so light you didn't really need power anything. It was boxy, a bit slow, but incredibly practical. May often said that it reminded him of what cars used to be: affordable, honest, and built to just get the job done. No fake performance packages, no giant screens, just a good engine and a decent heater. He used it for years as his daily driver, trips to the shop, studio runs, and even cross-country journeys. While others mocked it, he stood by it, and in typical May fashion, he made one or two tiny tweaks, like fitted winter tires year-round for better grip in London's unpredictable weather, and swapped out the original cassette player for a simple aftermarket radio that could handle a USB stick full of classical music. But that's about it. No spoilers, no wheels, no racing stripes. In fact, when he finally sold it in 2014, he wrote an entire column mourning its departure. Not because it was fast, not because it was rare, but because it never once let him down. Sometimes the cheapest cars leave the biggest impression. Moving on, one of the most unexpected cars in James May's collection is the humble 1977 Datsun 120Y. Originally bought in 2007 for the Top Gear Botswana Special, the 120Y wasn't picked because it was fast or flashy. It was chosen because it was cheap, affordable, and could, hopefully, survive the harsh African terrain. May paid just under £1,000 for the car, and at the time, it was meant to be a disposable filming prop. But here's the twist. May didn't just survive Botswana with it, he bonded with it. While the others struggled with overheating Alfa Romeos and fragile Opels, May's Datsun, despite its lack of power and basic interior, kept soldiering on. It wasn't glamorous, but it was dependable. And that struck a chord with May, whose driving style has always leaned toward steady and sensible. After the trip, instead of abandoning it like most production vehicles, May shipped the Datsun all the way back to the UK. He then had it cleaned up, repainted in its original mustard yellow, and lightly restored, but not overdone. He kept the body mostly stock, didn't add modern parts, and left the worn interior untouched to preserve the memories of the journey. Under the hood, it received a basic tune-up and a new carb, just enough to keep it running for occasional drives around London. He even displayed the car on his Amazon Prime show, James May, Our Man in Japan, showing off how something so cheap could hold such value when paired with real experiences. Did you know? During filming in Botswana, May affectionately called the 120Y the car that won't die, and to this day it still hasn't. And rounding off his collection of curiosities, James May once owned a Vauxhall Cavalier Mk1, and yes, he genuinely liked it. He bought the car in the early 2000s while working on one of his solo projects, long before the Grand Tour era. It wasn't for a challenge or even an ironic purchase. He picked it up purely because he wanted to revisit a car that, in his words, was part of the furniture during his youth. The Cavalier Mk1, especially in the basic trim he chose, wasn't the kind of car people usually bragged about. No turbo, no leather, just a simple four-door with a 1.6-liter engine and vinyl seats that stuck to your legs in the summer. But that was the point. May liked the fact that it was honest, nothing fancy, just straightforward motoring. He reportedly paid just £600 for it, and even at that price, the seller offered to throw in a second one for parts. May didn't leave it completely untouched. He swapped out the faded radio for a newer unit with USB support, purely for convenience, and had the original paint buffed back to life. But beyond that, he kept it stock. Even the beige upholstery stayed. He said the Cavalier represented a time when cars weren't trying to impress, they just worked. And despite the jokes from his co-hosts, he drove it for nearly a year before passing it on to a collector who restored it further. It may not have turned heads at a car show, but for May, the Cavalier was a reminder of a simpler time, when reliability, comfort, and a £5 petrol top-up were all you needed. And speaking of strange charm, wait till you see what Clarkson did with a 25-year-old Volvo estate. That's coming up next. For all his love of loud engines and over-the-top V8s, Jeremy Clarkson once made a surprisingly sentimental purchase, a Ford Cortina 1600E. This wasn't a car bought to impress anyone. It wasn't fast, rare, or expensive, but it meant something to him. He bought the car in the early 2000s, reportedly paying just under £3,000, specifically because it reminded him of his youth. Growing up in the 70s, Clarkson said the 1600E was the kind of car you aspired to own. It was what the cool dads or young professionals drove, somewhere between working-class grit and executive polish. The 1600E was based on the Cortina MK2, but with a bit of flair. Ford added wood veneer on the dash, chrome detailing, and extra gauges. It came with wide steel wheels, a blacked-out grille, and Lotus-inspired suspension tweaks. It wasn't a performance car by any stretch, but it looked the part, and that was enough to win over a generation. Clarkson didn't heavily customize his. In fact, he reportedly kept it as original as possible. The point of owning the car wasn't to modify it, it was to preserve the memory. He had it detailed, fixed up some small cosmetic flaws, and made sure it ran smoothly, but left the core untouched. No engine swaps, no body kits, no wild paint jobs. In an interview, Clarkson once joked that while the Cortina 1600E may be rubbish by modern standards, it had more charm than most new cars. And charm to him was worth a lot more than performance stats. For someone who's driven just about every supercar on Earth, that says a lot. Sometimes the best cars aren't the fastest, they're just the ones that take you back. Then there's the Volvo 850 T5 Estate, a car you probably wouldn't expect to find in Jeremy Clarkson's collection, but that's exactly what makes it so good. While he's usually surrounded by V12s and muscle-bound monstrosities, this boxy Swedish estate had something that caught his attention: subtle power. Clarkson reportedly bought the car in the late 90s when he needed something practical for hauling around the family. But of course, practical by Clarkson's standards still had to be fast. The 850 T5 fit the bill. It had a turbocharged 2.3-liter 5-cylinder engine pumping out 225 horsepower, enough to surprise quite a few BMWs at the lights. And more importantly, it looked like a school-run car. That contrast was part of the charm. While there's no record of flashy upgrades, Clarkson did keep the car in top condition and often spoke fondly of its dual personality. It had the space of a delivery van, the comfort of a cruiser, and just enough grunt to make him giggle like a kid when the boost kicked in. He called it one of the best sleeper cars of its time, and he's not wrong. There weren't any massive customizations either, just a well-maintained example in factory spec. He didn't slap on aftermarket spoilers or black out the windows, it was bone stock, which made it even funnier when people realized just how quick it actually was. Today, you could still pick up a decent one for under £2,000. It might not turn heads, but it'll absolutely pull them when you put your foot down. And if it's good enough for Clarkson's driveway, it's definitely worth a second look. Do you like stories like this? Smash that like button and hit subscribe. We've got more hidden gems and cheap rides owned by your favorite celebs coming up next. And for the wild card, Jeremy Clarkson's Mercedes-Benz 600 Grosser, the dictator car of choice back in the day, famously driven by everyone from Elvis to Kim Jong-il. But Clarkson's wasn't showroom quality, not even close. He bought it years ago for just a few £1,000s. It was one of those what could possibly go wrong purchases, and well, everything did. The 600 Grosser, especially in long wheelbase Pullman form, is one of the most complex cars Mercedes ever made. It runs on a high-pressure hydraulic system that powers everything: the windows, the seats, the trunk, even the suspension. And when that breaks, you're not just calling your local garage, you're calling a specialist who charges like a private surgeon. Clarkson admitted that the restoration costs ballooned far beyond what he paid for it. In fact, he once said the only reason he didn't junk it was because of how ridiculous the whole situation had become. He didn't even bother changing much, no new paint, no flashy wheels. He just wanted to get it running, to prove a point. Sometimes, cars with the worst problems have the best stories. The engine was eventually rebuilt, the hydraulics mostly worked, and the car even appeared in a few Grand Tour and Top Gear bids. Always a little smoky, always a little sketchy, but Clarkson loved it for exactly that reason. So yeah, when you see a man who could buy any supercar drive around in a barely functioning dictator limo, you know there's passion behind the wheel. But when it comes to cheap cars with real character, no one does it better than Richard Hammond. Hammond's collection includes some proper head scratchers, but none more iconic than the 1963 Opel Kadett, affectionately named Oliver. This wasn't just a prop for the Botswana special episode of Top Gear, it became a passion project and a genuine favorite of his. He bought the car during filming in 2007 for the Africa special. The production team had each presenter pick a used car for the cross-country journey. Hammond picked the Kadett for one simple reason: it was the only one that actually worked. At the time, it cost him around £1,200, a tiny sum even back then. But while May's car fell apart and Clarkson's lost its doors, Oliver just kept on going. No breakdowns, no drama. That reliability in a harsh environment earned the car serious respect. By the end of the journey, Hammond had grown so attached that he refused to leave Oliver behind. He had the car shipped back to the UK, fully restored it, and even registered it for road use. The restoration wasn't over the top. He kept the original body shape, paint color, and interior, but under the surface, it got a full mechanical refresh. Brakes, suspension, wiring, it was all brought up to spec. Even the tires were swapped for better road grip. He later featured Oliver in his short-lived show Richard Hammond's Blast Lab and has been seen driving it at events and on social media. It even has its own Twitter fan page. For Hammond, this cheap little car became more than a souvenir. It was a symbol of endurance, simplicity, and personality. And in a garage filled with supercars and rare classics, Oliver still holds a front-row spot. Today, a similar cadet might go for $3,000 to $5,000, but none will have a fan base like Oliver. Next up, the Austin Allegro. Yup. That Allegro. The one regularly voted one of the worst cars Britain ever made, and somehow Richard Hammond went out of his way to buy one. He picked it up back in the early 2000s during a retro car segment for a Top Gear challenge. The task was simple: buy a classic car on a tight budget. Hammond showed up with this beige time capsule for just a few £100s. No one expected him to keep it after the camera stopped rolling, but he did. Why? According to Hammond, it was so bad it actually became good. He called it comically awful, but sort of brilliant in its own little way. It had a wheezy engine, uncomfortable seats, and the famously bizarre square steering wheel, a design choice that's still baffling to this day. But the Allegro had a certain charm. It was slow, underpowered, and made strange creaking noises when cornering, but Hammond liked that it was honest. No pretensions, just a car trying its best. He didn't go wild with modifications either. In true Hammond style, he kept it mostly stock. He had it serviced enough to keep it running and added a pair of retro mud flaps and a tiny bobblehead dog in the rear window because, well, why not? It's Hammond. He later admitted he only kept it so guests would see it parked next to his classic Mustangs and wonder what on earth is that doing here? And that's exactly the kind of mischief you'd expect from him. Fun fact, the Allegro's designers once tried to convince buyers that the square steering wheel was ergonomic. It wasn't, it just made turning feel like operating a broken vending machine. And rounding it out is the Volkswagen Scirocco MK1, a car that's often overshadowed by the Golf GTI, but it has its own special charm. Richard Hammond picked one up in the early 2000s, long before his garage was filled with high-end classics. He bought the Scirocco MK1 for under £1,000, calling it one of the best cheap cars he ever owned. It wasn't for a show or a challenge, it was something he genuinely liked. The MK1 Scirocco was Volkswagen's first proper attempt at a stylish sports coupe. It shared a lot of its guts with the early Golf, but had a sleeker, sharper body. Hammond liked that it was light, fun to drive, and didn't take itself too seriously. His version was a 1976 model, finished in a faded silver when he first bought it. He later had it resprayed in its original factory color, fitted some period-correct alloys, and replaced the saggy seats with matching OEM replacements he sourced through a VW club. Under the hood, he didn't do much, just a tune-up, new exhaust, and a rebuilt carb. It still had its original 1.5-liter four-cylinder engine, and he kept it that way on purpose. He once joked that the whole point of the Scirocco was that you could drive it flat out all the time and still not get into trouble. For Hammond, it wasn't about speed, it was about feel. A light, clean, affordable coupe that reminded him what driving was really about. Simple, honest fun. So there you have it. The kings of Top Gear, known for driving million-dollar machines, have a soft spot for the underdogs of motoring. Whether it's a Panda, Cortina, or rusting Opel named Oliver, these cars prove one thing: price doesn't always equal passion. Which one's your favorite from the list? Drop it in the comments, and if you haven't already, smash that like button and subscribe. We've got more car lists coming that'll make your garage feel seen. Stay tuned.